Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bad EM podcast. My name is Daniel Sill, and I'm your host. Bad EM stands for Brave African Discussions in Emergency Medicine, and this is a platform we use to try and find African solutions for African problems. This episode, we are delighted to welcome the newly elected President and Vice President of ECSSA, which is the Emergency Care Society of South Africa, Yaaseen Hokee and Dr. Louis van Rensburg. We chat about what ECSSA is, where it started and where it's going, some collaborations that they're working on between different sectors of emergency healthcare, as well as advocacy for pre-hospital providers themselves in terms of education, policy making, and getting decisions made at a regulatory level. It's a broader theme of breaking down communication barriers and working together as a community. Would you guys mind starting by introducing yourselves? And Louis, when it's your turn, could you also touch on the PhD you've just completed, which is quite topical for this podcast in general and what we're going to speak about today.
Dad, thank you for having us. Once again, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Yaaseen Hokee. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. I currently hold a master's degree in emergency medical care. I have a big focus on workplace violence against paramedics. That was actually my master's topic, and I did quite a lot of research on that as well. And I'm currently busy with a postgrad diploma in higher education. Very passionate about the profession, about research and moving the profession forward, as well as the education side of things. And being able to be part or being the president of ECSSA as well has now kind of given me that platform now to give back to the profession after all these years. Just a brief backstory, I had worked for both government and private EMS services, both very unique experiences. I've been very fortunate enough to work in the HEMS environment, the ICU environment, as well as your normal ops. And all of that together has given me quite a unique outlook and perspective on the profession. And it's led to where I am today in the sense of trying to drive the profession in a better direction, in a more positive direction as what we currently are now. Thank you. Louis?
Thanks, Hokee. And thanks, Dan, for putting me on the spot. I am recently qualified Dr. Louis van Rensburg, an emergency care practitioner by profession, and I'm currently serving as a deputy director at the National Department of Health, where my portfolio recently changed. It's been a bit of a roller coaster, but I'm looking after education and training in the EMS space. And then, as per introduction, initially I serve as the vice president of Emergency Care Society of South Africa, or ECSSA in short. I've started my career born and bred in the Western Cape. Basically started my ambulance career as a grade 10 boy, volunteering every single weekend and every holiday I could get, and did official studies. So I started as an advanced life support paramedic initially in 2014 in the small coastal town of Mossel Bay in the Western Cape. Thereafter, I kind of transgressed into education, but I've worked as a frontline paramedic for most of that. Education and research then kind of stepped into play. I worked a little bit at the Western Cape Emergency Care College, where I was responsible for critical care retrieval and then also clinical facilitation of the students. In addition to the emergency care practitioner qualification or degree that I hold, I have a master's in emergency medicine, MPhil from UCT as well. And then I've recently completed a PhD, which focused on developing a critical care retrieval curriculum tailored to the South African context. And I think in a nutshell, to just wrap that up, is why we've done that is we've realized that we move so much patients in the South African setting between hospitals, whether that's because of the referral levels that we have in facilities, or whether that's because of ailing resources or just hospitals that's not able to look after patients, whether that's due to clinical complexity or actually having the equipment or the staff to care for those cadres. But we've also realized that our practitioners are often ill prepared. Myself worked in the space initially, and I think Hokee can attest to that as well. When you step in, you're quite, I almost want to say, bold and confident in what you're doing when you take on those transfers. But soon you find yourself in a space where you actually realize, sure, I just know enough, or I actually have to go and read more to actually look after this trade of patients. And it is tricky to care for them during transit. So that's kind of in a nutshell. And then just to end off, I am deeply passionate about improving EMS systems, advancing education, and ensuring equitable access to emergency care. So that's kind of why my roots also stepped into that direction. I hope that summarizes. Thanks, Dan. Over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that, and congratulations. As you said, it's a field where you are always learning, and you're always reminded when you need to learn more. And I think that won't ever change.
No, probably not.
For those of us who aren't familiar, could one of you guys give us a brief background of EXA and what it is, what it's done in the past, and where it's at now?
ECSSA started, or was initially started maybe the early 2010s, around there. And the main focus of ECSSA was to create a body or society that represents the pre-hospital emergency care personnel or profession as a whole. Historically, ECSSA had a big focus on trying to create spaces for professional connections, peer support, in some cases, even academic exchanges. And there were one or two aspects, such as your CPD events or your conferences, that ECSSA tried to promote or had promoted to try and almost bring the profession together, if that makes sense. And I think as a whole, it was just there to represent the interests of the EMS profession, which up until then, there wasn't really a body representing us as a whole. Obviously, nurses have their specific unions, doctors have, I think, what you guys refer to as EMSA as well. And there wasn't really that platform for us as pre-hospital care providers to raise our concerns or to have a voice for that matter. And since then, I think ECSSA's worked quite hard and quite tirelessly to try and become that voice for the profession. I don't know if there's anything you want to touch on or add on to that.
I'm happy with that. Thanks, Hokee.
Awesome. And what are some of the things that you are planning to do in the future, or the direction that you wish to take it in? Well, let's start with the near future, and then we can move on to a broader goal.
So I think just with regards to that, the near future and everything else, I think at the moment, ECSSA's in quite a unique and exciting phase. Just as early as last year, we had our first conference in 7 years, and that was quite successful. And funnily enough, that's actually how Louis and I first met. And we slowly started chatting and got on board on this ECSSA thing. And now that the new board is together, there's a lot of new ideas that we are trying to implement, a lot of new initiatives. We've got quite a strong team. We are focusing quite a lot on advocating for the profession, like I said earlier, being that voice. We are trying to get more people from our profession involved in certain things, such as our special interest groups. So we are trying to form different interest groups in research, for example, or in the HIMSS or critical space environment that Louis is quite passionate and knows quite a lot about. So we are, as a whole, trying to establish new relationships. We are open to not just working with people within the profession, but the hospital environment, not hospital environment, but the health profession as a whole. I know between myself and Louis, we have started reaching out to various stakeholders and various partners as well. And the idea of ECSSA is not to necessarily just be or operate in silos. We are trying to take quite a holistic approach and form relationships with whoever we possibly can, in the hope of trying to actually better not just our profession, but even build bridges between other specialties, like emergency medicine, for example, or nursing, or whatever the case may be.
Since you mentioned building bridges and connecting with other disciplines, can you touch on which like educational platforms or conferences that build communities and share knowledge and help build more of a society and understanding of what everyone does, and how we can improve knowledge and sharing and understanding?
So, Louis, do you want to jump into this one? I know you've been a bit more involved in that aspect of that relationship side.
So I think definitely, and to touch on what was Yaaseen mentioned, is one of the things that we're trying to do, and it's probably going back to one of the earlier questions, is but we're trying to not just have this heavy research focus, which ECTA had in the past. And there's a good reason for that. I mean, research is the foundation of many things, but if we have a look at I almost want to say our members or our followers or the bulk of our profession, they are not really going to be the people that attend our research kind of days, or that read the papers that come out of ECSSA or researchers in the space. So we've kind of tailored it slightly different, and we'll get to that. But we would like to look at the profession or industry We would like to look at educational aspects of that, and then we would like to look at research. But when it comes to the integration with the other healthcare sectors and things, I think we definitely have a space to fill there, and it's long overdue. And as been a theme for the last few years, when we speak about emergency medicine, everybody says break down the silos. But unfortunately, we still find ourselves in silos when we start speaking to each other, whether that's emergency care nursing, whether that's emergency medicine as doctors, or whether that's emergency medical services. So with that, I think, and it's probably duplicating what Yaaseen mentioned, but we do believe, or we are aiming for data integration between EMS education and other healthcare disciplines, whether that's emergency medicine, anesthesiology, and critical care. And one of the things that we try and advocate for is collaboration across the various training institutions as well. And if I can reflect to something that's happening within the Western Cape space currently is, for example, we've got Stellenbosch Medical School that does undergrad training of the doctors, but they've realized, hey, we're lacking on an EM gap and we're lacking on an EMS knowledge. So let's collaborate with EMS in the space and let's come up with this 1 week, they call it an EMS boot camp, and they actually facilitate that kind of knowledge gap through using EMS as a vehicle for promotion. It's difficult because ECSSA doesn't always have all the relationships with all the HIEs currently. We have started building that up. So that is one of the ways we're thinking to integrate nursing and doctors and EMS into that space. And then we are envisaging to step into the space of joint guideline setting. So instead of having EM guidance, for example, just speaking to the in-hospital space, that we know there's a little bit of pre-hospital things on there, but it's very limited. Instead of things being purely focused to what's happening in the hospital space. So we are looking at the kind of joint ventures between the different professions when it comes to guideline setting, perhaps not in the space as we see within HPCSA, like clinical guidelines, but more standard procedure guidelines, whether that's handover guidelines, whether that's a transfer checklist, whether that is how do I actually debrief incidents, and those things can be joined amongst the various professions. Then something that Yaaseen touched on, but we are currently in the process of reaching out to partners. And if I can mention some, we've reached out to University of Pretoria, or we've reached out to Wits, emergency medicine specifically. We are in conversation with some colleagues in the private sector as well to see how we can foster a tighter relationship with EMS and actually the in-hospital. Because we don't believe that we are only the mobile wing of the healthcare system. We do play an integral role with even what's happening into the EC and even further. So yeah, I hope that kind of helps, but okay, over to you.
No, and just I think a final closing point on this. I mean, the idea behind the cross-training or getting involved with the different disciplinaries and different departments and everything else, it just builds better respect and breaks down those barriers like we've mentioned as well. There's a bit more clearer communication between everyone. And ultimately, I think the biggest win here is that there's better patient outcomes for the patients, as opposed to, once again, the working in silos. No one really knows what's going on, and now there's a delay here, there's a lag here. If everyone's on the same boat and there's that understanding between everyone, I just think patient outcomes, patient care, patient treatment, that will obviously all improve. And we don't need to be alone, if that makes sense, or work alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think those barriers break down with communication, and as soon as people understand each other better, like you say, those personal relationships grow, and those relationships between bigger communities also grow.
Sorry, if I can just jump in there as one last point. It won't be too long. I think one thing that is important and that we often find ourselves in, it's often difficult to change the mindsets that's been in the system for quite long. And whether that is on the hospital front of thing, or whether that is in the out of hospital kind of setting. And I think one of the things that we are trying to do is foster that relationship with even the undergrad programs. So start having that collaboration from an early point, and not just relying on the kind of the thought that we always had, well, you're working together in the field as students, so surely you're going to understand each other.
Yes, yeah.
But our training and curriculum design and those kind of things has never really crossed over with each other and never really fostered that sort of understanding. So hence why we're trying to focus on that undergrad aspect of things as well. That's the only thing I wanted to add. Over to you again.
I know that's definitely true. And in my, and I'm sure your undergrad training, there was zero crossovers. So to start that and to get that going is a vital part of what we're talking about here. Obviously, you mentioned some of the stuff, but is there anything else that you want to add in terms of anything that you're planning or any new initiatives?
Sure. So I think, Dan, as Yassine mentioned, is we try to change the initial approach that we've always had. So we kind of came up with this interconnected pillars, which is, we can call it industry or the profession, research and education. And the aim of that is to actually address the most pertinent things that we do face in EMS or the profession at large. So the one thing that we both touched on is the aspect that's actually looking at the guy that's working on the road or the emergency care provider for that thing or the professional. And what do they get from the society? What are we advocating for? Are we advocating for better guidelines? Are we advocating for better standard setting? Whether that is clinical things, whether that's operational standards, but it's essentially something that addresses the needs of the practitioner on the ground and that they can use to structure their practice and their career going forward. And part of that is also special interest groups. So we had a few in the past. There was actually 4 of them. And I'm not going to mention all 4 of them, but we're in the process of resurrecting the critical care and transport one. And then there's a research and development one, which again, I think is the backbone of the profession going forward and actually reaching its full potential. And we're busy resurrecting those, which we hopefully can get to actually contribute to the industry at the end of the day. I'm not going to speak on the research one too much, but we mentioned that we still want to have a research culture. So we have evidence to inform practice and where we're actually going with that. But there's also something that I think as ECSSA that we would like to do is we would also encourage research even on the undergrad platform, and we would like to make it a little bit more appetizing. Sometimes people get shivers when they think about research, but we want to actually show them, hey, it's not that difficult. Come join us. We write an opinion piece on why ambulance lights need to be red. I'm just using an example. But those kind of things and bring them on board and actually just make them more comfortable in the space. Essentially, that would lead to them to advocate for their own space in their own organization where they actually work. And then when it comes to education, of course, and CPD training. So currently we've brought up a centralized calendar of CPD events. We know some of our members and some of the providers out there struggle to get to either dedicated platforms of doing CPD or they don't have access to those. But in essence, there's a lot. But we just thought bring it under one house. We promote it under ECSSA. And the provider can still be whoever. The other things we'll probably speak on when we come to EMS education and almost want to say the stumbling blocks that we faced. Yeah, that's basically it. Okay, I don't know if you want to add something. Sorry, I get carried away sometimes.
No problem. I think you've summed everything up quite well. I think, Dan, maybe just another last point from our side. The EMS profession hasn't been around for as long as what medicine has been. I think it probably started around the 80s, 90s, and I mean, now it's actually developed now into something decent. We've moved out of that infancy stage, and much like any teenager or any child, we are growing and there are stumbling blocks along the way. But the notion of where we are just ambulance drivers or whatever the case is, that is slowly coming to an end. We want to be recognized as a professional, a professional profession, if you will. I don't know if that's the correct term or not. But we have every right to be recognized as that, as much as the nurses, as much as the doctors. We are now in a position where we have more and more paramedics, I use that very loosely, with PhDs, with masters that can contribute to the profession meaningfully. And I think in some cases, because we're still a growing profession, no one really knows where or how to go about sharing this knowledge or growing the profession as well. And if we can be that platform for I want to say our guys, for the profession, then why not? Why not grow it and become something better?
And it's a gap that certainly needs to be filled. And if you can provide an outlet for people to, like you said, do research, gain knowledge, collaborate, meet each other, and just come together as a profession, then that is a wonderful thing in itself. Let's move on to policy and systems change at a higher level. where you've got bodies such as the HPCSA and the Department of Health who make decisions about policy regarding pre-hospital medicine and scope of practice and things like that. Does ECSSA have a role there in advocating and providing? You touched on it, Louis, about the research that is being put out by pre-hospital people that can actually guide practice change.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Okay, I'll have a go, and then you can add if we need. I think that yes, we definitely have a role to play, and if we have to go back in company rules from when it originated, and I think Hokee alluded to 2009, 2010, individuals, or let's say the organizations, the HPCSA and the National Department of Health and the Provincial Departments of Health, has always been those role players that sit around the table with us. But in all honesty, those relationships has never been really leveraged. And we can push those to different reasons. Some of it being personalities, some of it being institutions. And we're really trying to rebuild or reignite those relationships, and we making some strides slowly but surely. I'm being optimistic. But I think, as you mentioned earlier on, Dan, it's all about the communication and actually starting to foster that relationship again. And instead of being the voice that just saying, no, do it this way, or yes, do it that way, rather just say, how can we collaborate and actually pushing the industry forward? We are in the process of reestablishing those relationships and actually engaging with the HPCSA and the board itself. We're quite excited about the new board that's been nominated. It's not released yet, but we think the synergy between the new ECSSA board and the new HPCSA board is actually at the right space that needs to happen. And meaning that when the new board takes over, I think it's in October, ECSSA can raise his hand and say, hey, we're also back in this space now. We're going to start having this conversation with you. Similarly with, and this is probably just because of the position that I hold now, but with myself being in the national department, I can pull a lot of the ECSSA conversation into the national department. And luckily for some of our other board members, we've got some of them that's affiliated to some other provincial services. So we already have those informal relationships due to kind of employment, but opened up a lot of seats. And we're also working with another initiative that we're taking as an approach is we actually now, which is the first for ECSSA, is getting provincial representation. Someone in the province that's willing to represent their province as EMS to actually directly liaise with us, to foster that relationship. And then finally, I think our goal is not just to respond to policy, but it's to shape it proactively. And for that to happen, we need to be part of the conversation. And that's the conversation that's happening at HPCSA or within the national office or within provincial offices, but also the conversation that's happening on the ground. And again, in the past, that's been lacking. And I think the board now has the opportunity to, was actually currently doing it already, to bring that conversation in, because it's ultimately the voice on the ground that's going to help us shape the trajectory going forward. It can't just be the board. But that's what I have to say for now. I think Hokee, over to you if I've missed anything.
No, like I said, I think Louis has summed that up quite well. Once again, it's very nice that we are able to weigh in on these aspects. And once again, for the pre-hospital care providers, we are trying to be that collective voice. We are trying to just go beyond representation. We are trying to influence certain policies that may reflect what's actually happening on the ground, which in most cases, a lot of the people that are up in the high positions can't or don't really relate to. And we are trying to get there and be that voice for those people.
Maybe just as a hypothetical example, just to illustrate what a actual process might look like. So say, for example, there's good research and good evidence that a pre-hospital member is qualified enough to discharge somebody at the scene. And there's a paper that says there's no bad outcomes if there's good safety netting, etc., etc. So we've got research, and then that is starting to be widely accepted in the pre-hospital community. How would that physically get translated into policy? Would HPCSA decide that, or would the National Department of Health decide that? And once that decision has been made, where does that get published? The guideline would obviously pop up on EM guidance, perhaps, or how does that what does that look like in practice?
Sure. So I think, Dan, thanks for that question. It's a really valuable one to kind of sketch the picture or the scenario. So I think, and I'm just going to take it slightly back, if it's okay. So if we look at the profession, our clinical scope and guidelines and what we are allowed to do and those kind of things as almost since existence been done by the HPCSA. Before that, it used to be, I think, the Medical and Dental Board or something like that. And that in itself is quite a weird anomaly, which the HPCSA has acknowledged, because no other profession has the scope set out by the professional board that does regulation per se. So they're supposed to regulate our practice and give us a number to practice or the autonomy to practice, but they are not necessarily supposed to be the guiding body that gives the yay or nay when it comes to whether that is clinical pre-hospital discharge or whether that is the use of I'm going to just say TXA, for example. In saying that is the final authority of scope as it lies within the National Department of Health, and it actually goes under the Minister of Health. But that is never really played out like that. We had the board review things, we had scopes updated, and that gets published by the HPCSA, and that gets seen as this is what we're allowed to do and this is what we're not allowed to do, with very little space to even advocate for the addition of something like pre-hospital discharge or whatever other agent we want. So, for example, we have pre-hospital discharge and therefore a certain cadre, but the profession itself doesn't really support that because there's no safety nets and whatever, like you mentioned. So the way that it's supposed to actually happen is, and this is starting to formulate now with a little bit of work that we're doing at the National Department, along with some provincial departments, and ECSSA is also going to get on board now, is that the society, and I'm going to take the conversation back to the society now, the society is supposed to advocate for the addition or inclusion of that latest evidence. That needs to come to a EMS clinical technical working group, which has just been established in the NDOH. So that's very fresh. The profession wouldn't even know about that yet out there. And that, together with motivation from the society, the National Department of Health standard setting committees, such as NEMLAC, but I know they're specifically on medicine, needs to go to the HPCSA and then say, this is how we are going to practice. Please just endorse this. Instead of saying, no, we can't do this. There's a little bit of evidence review that needs to happen within ECSSA and be that voice. And it's never really happened. We're starting to step into that place. And hence I mentioned, I think it's quite exciting that there's a new board coming in and that the clinical working group within NDOH has been set up. So there's a little bit of a push to say, hey, we're here now. We can start advocating for our own profession in the space. And I think just to add on, the last thing is the current way that it's been going, implementing or changing or advocating for additions or removal or whatever when it comes to guidelines and things has not been really user friendly. There is no way. Even myself sitting in the national office, there's no way to reach out to the board and say, we are advocating for X, Y, and Z. Some people would be very upset if they listen to this recording now. But the issue with it is it's only happening twice a year. So I can submit something today and you only look at it in November. By the time you've looked at it and actually given me feedback or the society or which even organization, it's no longer relevant. Or the organization went ahead and actually implemented without getting that efficiency. So one of the things that we as ECSSA are going to try and do in this space is also just being that society that is clinically reflexive. So if people reach out to us and say, hey, this is the new evidence, this is the thing happening on the block, we should be using X, we shouldn't be using Y, then we can be that advocating voice and then actually write to the National Department of Health and actually the HPCSA.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's very useful. You would think it would be easier if there's good evidence to establish a provincial or national protocol of how we do something, but the stumbling blocks seem endless. Let's move on. So, in terms of a educational, the educational system for pre-hospital practitioners, I know a lot of people struggle with the qualifications and the seemingly possibly repetitive nature between the ECA, the diploma, and then becoming a ECP. And one would have to finish each level to then start the next one. And this is based on a conversation I've had with certain pre-hospital practitioners. Is there any capacity for people to change that, or who would make that decision to make it more continuous or user friendly in terms of obviously time and money and continuation of upskilling yourself?
So if I can, I'll step into this one. Just for maybe some context, and maybe just to correct you, Dan, as well. In the past, we had the system. In the past, we had the system BLS, ILS, and eventually you become an ALS or CCA. Those form part of the short courses. That was the 4-week course, the 3-month course, and then the 9-month course. As a profession, we had completely stopped that. I think the last set was maybe stopped around 2018, 2019. That was stopped altogether. And we've now implemented the formally recognized qualifications, being the ECA, the diploma, and then the ECP course. Just to provide clarity, you don't need to complete one to do the other. I think in my instance, I went from matric straight into the ECP qualification and qualified as an emergency care practitioner. There's no bridging or step, if that makes sense. If you are an ECA and you would like to become a diploma paramedic or a ECP, then you can apply for either course. There's no really, and if you want to just apply for ECP for that matter, you're more than welcome to as well. Obviously, each qualification has certain limits in terms of scope of practice, years of study, and everything else that goes with it. And once you have completed your ECP qualification, then you can move on to your master's or your PhD or whatever the case may be. So just to provide clarity on that. I don't know if that answers your question.
So I think I worded it wrong. I meant to say, like, if you've done a diploma and then wanted to advance towards ECP, you would have to start from the beginning of an ECP degree instead of building on what you already have.
So with regards to that, what the universities implement, and we also implemented as well, is something that's referred to as RPL, recognition of prior learning. And Louis, you can step in if you want to correct me on 1 or 2 points here. But essentially, how that works is that if you are a diploma paramedic, for example, and you want to study ECP, you will then apply with your qualification, and based off that, it's most likely you won't start in first year again or at the beginning. Based off your qualification where you are, you will then be put into the specific year that suits that qualification. So it's not a case of, and I completely understand where you're coming from, where you start from the bottom every time. If you have the marks or whatever the case is and the qualification, you may not start in first year ECP, but you may start in second year ECP. And obviously there is that requirement where you will need to have proof or portfolio for that matter. And in some cases, even write a test, a competency test to make sure that you are able to step into that specific year with that qualification.
Can I jump in then, if it's okay? Sure. Thanks, Hokee. I think Dan, not because I know some of the individuals that you spoke to, but I think there does pose a challenge. And Hokee has rightly phrased that, yes, there is RPL. The issue that the profession faces and the bulk of the practitioner on the road is perhaps not, and I might be wrong, some people might correct me, but it's perhaps not the issue of purely RPL. It is, how do I actually get this training? I mean, if you someone now, for example, working on an ambulance that's still holding the BLS qualification or an ILS qualification, and I want to progress to, let's say, ECA. Let's say I make the minimum entry requirements and I want to progress to an ECA. And would physically require them to leave the ambulance service for a year. That would physically require a service to pay for them to go and study for a year or to fund my studies myself. And similarly, let's say I have obtained an ECA and now I want to proceed onto a diploma course. The courses often get offered as a full-time study, meaning that I require X student to be on campus for X amount of time. And it does differ with various universities. And I think that's where it makes it very difficult to actually give the solid answer. What is the best RPL process, or what is the best process to give people access to these programs? One of the things that I think is important from an ECSSA point of view is for us to be that advocate to say, hey, we are having this issue with transformation. We are seeing that the current way that programs are structured, and we can't change that because it's NQF 5, if I'm 6, and then 8. So we can't really say you will step in the middle of X program, or you've done 2-year diploma or 3-year diploma. Now you only have to do 1 year of ECT of the degree program. It's not really possible due to higher education institution rules and CHE rules. But how we deliver the curriculum is something we can argue for. Because as long as we meet the minimum standards, which kind of gets set by the professional board, the rollout of that curriculum by whichever educational institution is their prerogative. And I think that is something that we have a space to advocate in, to advocate for the more accessible pathways. I know there's talk around modular pathways, but it shouldn't just be talk. Because there's actually been research done that's out in the space to say, hey, the old vocational student is just as good as the student who reach all the marks and can also do online learning and can actually access my skills venue or X university to come and do practical days. But the theory can be done in the leisure of the ambulance seat or the home when it's on off days, and not actually requiring an ambulance service, firstly, to lose a practitioner for 1 or 2 years, or sometimes even 4 years. And for some of the practitioners, on the other hand, means I have to actually leave my job and pay myself because the service that I'm working for can't afford me the opportunity. So there's definitely that space where we can advocate for more accessible pathways. And then again, the modular bridging pathways, and for example, meaning I might do an ETA, might take me 6 months longer, but the first period is only theory. And then the additional 6 months I actually spend whether I'm doing the road pracs or with a senior crew member, whether I'm actually going to a skills facility. And I mean, if you look across the road, I can get a full nursing degree at UNISA while I'm sitting in my office right here now. And I just go and do skill sign-offs. So that's just the kind of way that I think that we can try and breach those gaps. And that probably might be frowned upon. Unfortunately, I just read an article the other day that spoke about the perverse incentives of universities keeping students in the seats. Because if they have them in the seats and they graduate them as per se, the money that they get to their pockets might be a little bit more. And that's seen as a full-time student, where the rebate is actually better than a distance student. But that's my take on it. Otherwise, I cause trouble.
I think you touch on a good point. I think for a different conversation for a different day, the whole concept of open access medical education, even for a medical degree, the need to study physically at a university might slowly be a thing of the past. But let's move on to the last question. You can each have a go at this. If you had a magic wand and could wave it and something in pre-hospital medicine would materialize on the spot, what would that be?
I think just from my side, I reflected on this question quite a lot in my experiences, and I think having worked both private and government, I have been able to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between. Reflecting on all, our profession has so much potential to really be something solid. And Louis will say, no, the Western Cape is good, and whatever the case is, and we know that. We really have the potential to be such a unified and progressive EMS system. The exposure that we get is unlike anything in this world. And the resources are there. The people are there. I think it's just a case of us concentrating that and reaching that target. So I think just unity amongst us. I don't see why, as a profession, we work in silos or even work against each other in some cases. Whether you have an ECA or ELS or ECP, it doesn't matter. We're all there for one purpose, and that is essentially, at the end of the day, the patient. So a progressive EMS system, I think, in this country would fix a lot of issues and would probably help with spill into the EDs and make that a bit easier as well. And that would obviously have a knock-on effect with internal medicine and everything else that goes with it. But yeah, I think, Louis, you can have a shot at it.
Thanks, Hokee. Honestly, it's probably my bias. I would love if everybody could wear the nice emerald green uniform of the public service and represent us out there strongly. But Hokee kind of touched on many of the aspects. But I think essentially it would be a EMS service that delivers equitable care regarding where you find yourself. And I think that's quite apparent when we look at the research and we read and even travel the country, that there's still a clear disparity between our urban centers and the rural setting. And if I speak about a well resource setting in any space that we go to, it's not necessarily that high income country ambulance. It's something that is suitable for our context. So it's an EMS, and I would really love to have an EMS that is responsive to our setting, where we find ourselves in. And I'm going to use an example. If we find ourselves in a space where we need to do more primary healthcare, then let our system be adaptive and allow that. It might be frowned upon because we still dress ourselves as EMS and we still have red lights and sirens, but the need sometimes in our communities is completely different. So that is the one thing, is having an EMS system that is adaptive and responsive to the community or the client need. And then I think if we can have systems that, well, we can have them, but if we can implement systems that robustly really look at what clinical care we do deliver, whether that is applying the bandage or whether that is going into full on ALS stuff, is just a system of monitoring those. And I know that's something that is lacking in our hospital settings even. And then lastly, just to kind of have EMS practitioners being this autonomous, decision capable clinicians that's able to advocate for their own profession. We have a few. We have some people stepping up to the table, but it's not always easy. And I can acknowledge and attest to that. But I think if EMS is the profession, even the guy in the small service running around a small local neighborhood would realize, hey, I'm the advocate for my profession. And wherever I need to find my avenues to actually speak, start stepping up and do those. As a last point, sorry, I said the previous one was a last point, but this is kind of just to have an EMS where we are really involved with our clients and our community. I mean, if you look at something and this, Hokee, don't shoot me, Western Cape Ambulance Service doesn't do this, but the Western Cape government, for example, has this Thursdays thing, which they open up to the community and they speak to them and they listen to them and they actually come to the table. EMS does have that platform to do those kind of things. Whether that is a private EMS system or a public EMS system, is actually ask our people what they want. There's been some work done in the research space already, and the answer is actually quite simple. And not to debunk this entire podcast, but some of them say we just want transport. Don't want your red lights, and I don't want your fast driving or whatever. I have a problem of getting to the facility. But again, it ties into the previous point. What I mentioned is we need to be responsive to the need and the area that we serve. And it might be a completely different model of EMS. I mean, if we look at the WHO has got this tier 1 and tier 2 EMS systems, where tier 2 is the professional system as we know it. And tier 1 is a more community-based and first responder system. But it might mean that we need a amalgamation of those two. We still have formal EMS as we know it, but we need this community-based setting as well. And that's kind of where I want to end that then. So yeah, ultimately responsive EMS system that adapts to the needs of the setting. Thanks.
Thanks, Louis. Very well put. Yaaseen, is there anything else you would like to touch on before we finish off?
I feel like we've covered everything. I think once again, ECSSA is at a very exciting point. We really want to try and become a society that is for the profession, that is a voice for the profession, a society that does once again reach out to certain stakeholders, certain partners. Like we've mentioned earlier as well, we don't see a need to work in silos, and I just think, given the fact that we've started off so well, the idea is just to continue and just to strengthen relationships. Honestly, once again, I've been on so many calls where you get to the hospital and you really drop off a patient and there's so much frustration, and it's not intentional or anything between doctor, nurse, or paramedic for that matter, but there's just that communication breakdown, that silo that we work in. And if we can start understanding each other as well as the frustrations that we experience, I just think it will just make everything a lot easier for everyone.
Very well said indeed. Thank you, both of you, so much for joining us. It seems that ECSSA is in very good hands, and by virtue of this, the pre-hospital community in South Africa can look forward to a period of positive growth, I think. Thanks for coming on, and good luck with all of your projects.
I think myself and Louis really, really appreciate it. I think you've picked up Louis much more of a talker than what I am. But thank you for the opportunity. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
That's all for this episode. To summarize, we spoke about the past and the future of ECSSA, touching on some of the specific areas that they are focusing on with their new board. We spoke about the integration of research and best practice into decision making from a regulatory level. We also spoke about pre-hospital qualifications and how those have changed over the years and might change again with time going forward. And ultimately, the broader theme was about how ECSSA is moving forward into an organization that is there for the people it represents and getting pre-hospital providers to the table when it comes to healthcare provision in South Africa. And that's about it. Be sure to review and subscribe on all of your main platforms and send this to a friend or colleague who might be interested. If you want to get in touch, find me on LinkedIn or email me at dan@badem.co.za. Please also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Brave African Discussions and X or Blue Sky as BadEM. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.